With only a few short weeks left until we're at the World Championships, there's not a lot of time left for your team to prepare as they move towards there. And this week is a whole bunch of different MTI results that are coming out to take a look at a bunch of different solo matches. So let's take a look at some of these best robots and analyze what kind of patterns are we seeing across, and then talk about what kind of things your team can do in preparation for Worlds. So this week, there was a whole bunch of different submissions being put out for the Multinational Tech Invitational. It was formerly the Maryland Tech Invitational. It is not a premier event, but it's kind of like an advanced event for FTC specifically. I believe this has been running for the last 8 or so years, maybe 10 years in this. It's been around for a while, and teams can submit a couple forms, and typically some of the better performing teams end up being able to go to the MTI. So there's a bunch of different videos this week that teams have released of solo different performances. Now, I've been saying this with a grain of salt since the start of the season. Take solo performances with a grain of salt. Looking at a robot that is solo is an okay attribution for how robots are going to perform in competition, but it's not a full correct view of where these things might go and how it'll actually perform in an actual match. So first up, we've got 23441 with an autonomous here. And one of the things I want to highlight on these autonomouses is the pathing as well as the throughput for some of these robots. And you're going to start seeing a pattern with some of these robots that are getting very high quality for them. And a lot of the robots that are getting towards these World Championships, the premier level stages, are robots that typically have a pretty wide intake on the front, are relatively fast getting around the field, have some sort of rotational method, be it the entire robot rotating or be it the turret rotating. And then they have really solid driving. We'll skip past the autonomous for a lot of these. So pretty solid work out of team 23441. I quite like the design for just how high throughput they have. They can get a lot of artifacts into that goal quite quickly. Let's take a look at 19099 H-Tech, and they've got a 337 no penalty here solo again. So we'll take a look at some of their teleop. And again, when we look at the design of this robot, we've got things like a rotating turret. We have quite fast around the field, and we have a rather wide intake bar. Now you start getting a little bit of variation with these robots as around them, but the kind of core archetype of this is a rotating aspect and some sort of intro or some sort of wide intake for this, and quite quick around the field. So what are things that some of these robots are doing really well as they get towards these final stages? I think one of the big ones is removing a lot of weight. It's quite surprising when you look at some of these drive chassis, just how much extra weight can really start to slow down your robot. So let's take a look at 23849. This is Droid Force. As we continue talking about some of that excess weight, and the more weight we're adding onto our robot, of course, the slower we're going to be able to move around. And while defense is quite important to be able to be playing against, one of the things we're seeing is that if you can go pretty fast, it's pretty hard for you to even have defense be played against you, because you can show up to where you need to, launch out your 3, and despite even being heavy, another team coming up with a high impulse or really high movement into you ends up overcoming some of those weight issues as well. Then in my opinion, a higher speed is far more important. Something that is interesting on some of these robots is you start seeing a sort of dual intake or dual inside. This isn't something that's common on a lot of robots, but like on, I believe this is Droid Force here, they do have a dual intake, and there's a couple other robots that also have a dual intake. So we're kind of starting to get into a couple different archetypes there. Something else we're seeing from a lot of these top teams that is showing up to allow their drivers to perform a lot better is having driver-based automations. So we've got 23641 Cube robot here, and I believe they've got a flashing light there that lets their driver know that it is time to go. My assumption would be they also probably have some sort of vibration on their controller as well. So the more cues that you can give your driver to let your driver know that it's time, you've got 3, you are able to shoot, your flywheel's up to speed, whatever have you, the more automations that you can give your driver, the more likely it is for your driver to get some of those points. Because we're kind of starting to get to that point now in that, similar to those Formula 1 seasons, there's just a lot of fast cars out there. And the reality is the best driver ends up winning for the most part at the end of the day. And they've got some really impressive robots that I don't know if you can count on just your robot outperforming other robots up to this point. Let's take a look at Team 25590. This is Robo Rangers. And again, similar to the Droid Force here, we have another sort of dual intake for the robot. And what dual intake allows you to do is allow you to not have to move as diagonally quite as much, which is quite nice. And it also allows it a little easier for you to be able to not have to rotate as much. So it makes it a little easier on their turret to not have to rotate all the way around. So moving into this, we can see that teams are spending an awful lot of time doing a lot more driver practice. And I think that's something that teams are really going to have to focus on as they move into these World Championship phases. Next up, we've got 24906. I'm not sure what this team name is. It might be Maker U, I believe, but let's take a look at them on the teleop. This is another one of sort of single intake, and they've got a wider turret up on the front, and they've got a pretty, my guess is, as we see with teams on their turrets, teams seem to go with a much higher proportional and a high derivative control on their turrets, and then with quite a bit of wiggle or turn back. But again, for the most part, the thing that really only matters is that you are close-ish looking at your target to be able to fire in. I say that at the start of this clip, this team did fire 3 directly out, so it might need a little bit of tuning, but to be able to have that turret always locking on and making sure they know where they are is quite an impressive point. One thing to be careful of, especially in these driving matches, is making sure that you're not controlling 4 artifacts at a time. There are several teams here that are starting to control more than 3 artifacts at a time. That's definitely something that can go. Now, one of the things you're seeing here with this robot, despite having quite high throughput going through, their drivetrain is not quite as quick, and it might be due to heavier use of materials inside of the robot. It might be used to a heavier flywheel, might be used to having more motors on these. It might be the side plates they're using are a heavy material. It's used like they're using MDF, which is quite dense. Moving to a lighter material with some sort of pocketing might also benefit some of them inside of this as well, without making huge changes to the robot design. Next up, we've got 14988, which is Royal Robotics or Royal P-Botics. So let's take a look at theirs as well. Now, this is one of the shorter chassis. Now, the frame rate's a little low on this video, so I do apologize on that. But this is a shorter chassis for theirs, and it does allow them to get quite a bit quicker compared to some of these taller robots that we've been seeing. So again, you're kind of getting variation of the same kind of theme, and after a certain point, it just comes down to, at least in my opinion, a lot of driver practice and having really robust, resilient designs and making sure that your shots, as we've been talking about in the past year, making sure you're really angling those shots and going low on that goal so that they're less likely to bounce out. And we can see on this robot here, quite impressive, a lot of quick shots, quite a high throughput, but where the artifacts are actually getting pointed towards that goal, it's likely to fall out. So spending a little bit more time on that tuning to make sure that these things aren't falling out. Looks to me like they should probably be either shooting a little bit further into that goal or a little bit less far into that goal, so hitting on that angle piece as well. Some things to think about and some easier things to tune as you get into those final points. We've got 16255 Manurva Warriors here. Same kind of deal, focusing on the importance of moving through quickly. Now, this is one of the few robots here that has a fixed hooded shooter as opposed to a turret and rotating around. We've seen some of these before in the past on some of their performances as well, and other robots that we've seen just be able to auto-align that robot using that mechanism chassis to be able to drive themselves towards and align themselves up. For the most part, getting a little bit lighter on some of these chassis are going to really start improving some performance, but it's some really good work at a 16255 here as well for Manurva Warriors. Next up, we've got 3579. This is the Punishers team, and let's take a look at some of their teleop. Now, interesting about this robot is they've got quite a wide intake at the front, but they've gone for having wider ramps as well, as opposed to having that intake roller, and then going for being able to just scoop up some of those balls as well. Now, again, having some driver automations might be able to help. Now, this robot is semi-see-through, but it looks as though that green-based light is turning on the entire time. So depending on how much how much driver practice that driver has, it might make their life a little bit easier to throw on a sensor, throw on some limit switches, throw on a magnetic switch, depending on where or how your design sets up, thinking about what are ways you can make it a little easier on your driver to be able to know when they've got 3. We've got team 24033 Alphatronic. And again, I know that that's something I hear a lot about my teams doing in that practice field is, do I have 3? How many do I have? Do I have 3? And it's very different when you are on that actual competition field compared to when you're in the practice field. These flywheels are loud. And particularly when you're inside that competition, you also have other people cheering quite loud for you inside of those channels and for your opposing alliance as well. That a lot of teams during their driving practice, they are relying on auditory cues for when things are ready to go. And an auditory cue might not be enough for you to be able to perform on that as well, particularly because you're not going to be able to have that auditory section inside. So making it more visual for your drivers is a great method. We've got team 22947 Flying Fox, and this is one of the few here that is using a somewhat modified every bot design with a triple catapult to be able to launch things in. One thing that we're seeing on this is from that every bot design is that despite it being able to pick up artifacts quite quickly, it's not very quick at being able to launch artifacts out in that it has to be right in close. It's a good modification of the every bot design as well as some good driving for that. But to really get up to more kind of competitive levels in some of those top end, you really do need to start having higher throughput on that than a triple shot may be able to provide. Next up, let's talk about 24345 from Spark Tech. And again, this is a single shot here, a single intake on this robot, but not a lot of driver automations from what I can see based off of this or not driver automations. There probably are some automations for their robot, but some sort of cues for their driver to let them know when they are perhaps having 3. I think that's probably going to be a really important automation for teams to be able to pull up here. Is that at some of these really high skilled levels, a lot of their programs have already sorted out. I know when my flywheel's at speed. I know when it is locked onto the target. It's not even going to fire unless you have your flywheel up at speed and you're locked onto that target. So the next question becomes is how do we know when we have multiple artifacts inside? How do I know if I'm accidentally collecting 4? Does my intake shut off once I have more than some of these 3? And some of these designs naturally align themselves for that. Some of them end up not doing so as well. And last up here, we've got team 7149 Enforcers as well. This is another one of those robots that does have far more large lights to be able to let their drivers know when it is that they're able to fire in and have some of those things up and running. Quite a larger section as well for being able to bring in that intake. Another question I have on this one is, do you let your driver know when you have 3 artifacts in that? So as we head on out in that kind of final runs, those final weeks, some of the really important things are making sure that your drivers are getting lots and lots of practice in a competition environment. Make sure that there are some other sample robots that you can battle against. Build up some quick, small bots that you can compete against, particularly on that defense level, as it is you're doing some of these testing moving forward. If you've got a robot match or a robot design you'd like me to take a look at, consider submitting that in the FTC Fridays submission form down below. If your team is heading off for the World Championships, I will also be there at the World Championships this season down in Houston as well. One of my teams that I mentor ended up making it 24090. So if your team is there, I will also see you down in Houston. And as always, best of luck out there this season.